This training video will go over section 4 of your training manual, which is regarding manual entry, new move-ins. So I will actually go over how you will input your new move-in transactions with manual entries. Once you log into the system, this will be your landing page, and there you will just choose which option you want to actually access the property in the system. I'm going to actually input the Georgia ID number and click search. And this is going to take me to my project screen. And from the project screen, you will actually have to choose the project first and then proceed to building screen. You will either do that by clicking on the number here of buildings or proceed to buildings. So if I choose proceed to buildings and I forget to select my project first, I'm going to get this message here that states I must first select the project to continue. So I'm going to click my project and then proceed to buildings. Once I'm in the buildings screen, I'm going to have to proceed to the unit that I'm actually going to input my move-in transaction. So again, the first thing you want to do before you actually move to the unit screen is look at your current reporting period. Here you want to see that your last reporting period that that was done for in that particular building. So for instance, for building 4, my last reporting period was done in April of 2021. And you know that your reporting periods are done only on an annual basis. You also have until the 10th of the previous of the next month to make sure that you have all of your tenant transactions input into the system before you're realized as being out of compliance. So it's the same procedure that was done with the MITRE system. So, for instance, if I want to input a move-in transaction for building 3, and it states that I'm in July of 2021, then I'm going to change the reporting period for that particular building. So if I want to change it to September of 2021, what I would do is click on building 3, click change report period. And once I get to the report period screen, I'm going to change it to September. So I'm going, and the reporting periods will go from the first day of that month to the last day of that month. So I'm going to input, and also if you input an incorrect date format, it's going to error out and say that it's an invalid date. So you will click OK, and then it's going to automatically put the format in for you. So I'm going to also put in the last date of that particular month. And then here it's asking you whether or not you want to update all of your buildings. If you want to update all the buildings to September of 2021, you would just check that box. If you don't, and you're only updating the reporting period for building 3, you will leave the box unchecked and then click save. You notice I'm getting an invalid reporting period error. And it's basically saying the project frequency is monthly and the report period ending date should be September the 30th. If I click OK, it shows that I actually put in September the 28th as the last date of September. So it's gonna error out if you input the incorrect dates, and it's possibly you did it because of a typo. So I'm going to change this back to September the 30th. I'm going to leave the box unchecked because I'm only changing the reporting period for building 3 and then click save. And it said the information saved correctly. I'm going to cancel out and you're going to see that building 3, the new reporting period is September of 2021. So I'm actually going to input my move-in transaction into building 6. And then once I choose building 6, I will click proceed to units. So once I go into building 6, I see that I have 3 units and all 3 of the units are vacant. And you just actually choose which unit you're actually inputting your move-in transaction. So to input your either a move-in transaction or certification, you will always click here where it says new tenant cert. If you're inputting a move out or a unit transfer, you would choose one of these buttons here. But anytime you're inputting a move in or a certification or a recertification, you always click new tenant cert here. So I'm actually going to input my transaction into building 602. I'm going to choose new tenant cert, and it's going to give me a general information screen. At the top, it's going to give me the number of bedrooms. And with this being a test property, a lot of the information wasn't input here. But for your particular property, it's going to give you the number of bedrooms, the square footage of that particular unit, whether or not the unit is a market rate unit or a tax credit unit, which is the system designation, your reporting period. So again, you have another chance to make sure that you are in the correct reporting period. It's saying that I'm in actually January of 2020 is what I'm trying to input. And then it's going to state your BIN number and the project that you're inputting your transaction for. So it's going to give you this section here is where you actually input your head of household information. You will notice that on this screen there are 6 fields that have red asterisks next to it. You have a member name, which is the head of household name, the birth date of the head of household, the move-in date, the new cert date, the unit assistant type, and the owner's designation. Those fields must be completed before you can even save this information or move to another screen. But DCA is requesting that you input the information for all the fields listed here on this screen. Most of the information has to be reported to HUD on an annual basis. So we're requesting that you complete all the fields in this screen that applies to this particular unit. So I'm going to input the member name, and her name is going to be Georgia Peach, and social security number, her date of birth, and her occupation. A lot of these fields have drop-down boxes that you can choose information from. So I'm going to choose her occupation. And also for ethnicity and race, you must always keep those but they must never be blank. They have to always have a choice here. If for the race, the person chooses not to disclose their race, you just click choose to disclose, chooses not to disclose. And the same for ethnicity, just you would choose not available. Special population, this would be the actual tenancy of the property. If your property has dual tenancy, then you would choose the appropriate tenancy for this particular tenant. So if your property has both, say for instance, has both HFOP, which is housing for older people, and it also has family population there, you would choose the population or the tenancy according to the age. So for those housing for older people are those that are 55 and older, and then family would be anyone else. So since this particular person age is 42, she would not be under the tenancy for housing for older people. She would actually be the family tenancy. So I'm just going to choose family. Now, if her age was actually 55 and older, then that's when you would actually choose senior HFOP here. Then you will also choose whether or not the tenant is disabled here. You will input the move-in date, and the move-in date must be within that reporting period. So let's say that you actually forgot to check your reporting period before you started inputting the information. Once you start inputting the information, you won't be able to save it and then change the reporting period. You will have to actually start over again. So we're going to say you're actually trying to put in reporting period for January. I'm sorry, for February of 2020. And then if you notice, once you put in that date, it's saying that the move-in date cannot be greater than the end period date of the reporting period that you have listed, which is 1/31/2020. And you're going to click OK. And let's just say, for instance, you did forget to change your reporting period. So now you're going to have to go back and change the reporting period so you can input your February move-in transaction. So what you're going to have to do is delete the date and then cancel out. So once you cancel out, it's going to take you back to your unit screen. And then here you see a field that says change report period. So I'm going to change the reporting period to February. So it came, so it said that the date I put in was incorrect because I put the wrong year. And I'm just going to update the reporting period only for this building 6 and click save. And you see now it gave me another error message that says that the reporting period date should be 22/29/2020. And that's probably because in 2020 there was a leap year. So there was actually 29 days in February. So a lot of times, so I'm just, you will notice that I made purposely error in the system so you can see that the system does pick up a lot of errors, especially date errors that you mistakenly input into the system. So I'm going to change that to 28 and then click save. Okay, now it's saying that it should be 29. Yeah, because I forgot to change it back to 29 for the leap year. And you're going to click save. and it says successfully, and I'm going to cancel. So now I'm going to have to start over again. So you see now my current reporting period is February of 2020, which is what I really want it to be. So now I'm going to go to proceed units. Go to 602 where I want to input my move-in transaction. Click new tenant cert, and I'm going to put in the actual tenant name. I'm going to put in a different tenant this time. So security number. And again, I would choose the Tennessee. And since he is under 55, I'm going to choose family because this particular property had both a family and HFOP Tennessee. Click here if he was disabled, the move-in date, and the new cert date is going to be the actual move-in date. And you can also use the calendar here if you like, if you want to use the calendar instead of manually inputting your dates. Here you see it check initial certification, which basically means that was a move-in. The next thing you will feel you will complete is the unit assistant type. Also, please disregard non-qualified students. That doesn't apply to the system anymore. So please just disregard. You do not have to answer that or check that particular box there. Unit assistant type, I'm going to say no assistance, but if they did receive assistance, you can choose whichever assistance listed here that applies to the head of household. Owner designation, you're going to choose whether or not there's a home property, a tax credit property, a market rate unit. I'm sorry, a home unit, a tax credit unit, or market rate unit. If it was an employee unit, any of these that applies to that particular unit. If it was a home and tax credit unit, then you would choose home because that's the most restrictive of the two. So I would choose home, and then it's going to ask you to choose which home restriction that this unit has, whether it was low income or very low income home unit. I'm just going to make it an actual tax credit property. Tax credit unit. It's going to also ask you for the contact information. You're going to input their home information, home phone number. We don't necessarily need the work number because we won't be calling them at work, but you must complete this particular section for contact information in case we need to contact them regarding any residential concerns. So you will input the home number and if you have the email address. Here is where there will be transfer information. This would be here, this would be populated if there was a tenant that transferred into this unit from another unit, and it will auto-populate the transfer information here. So once you have this completed, this particular general information screen completed, you will actually click Save, and it will say the information for you. And you can kind of like just do a edit and look and see if there's anything here that you input incorrectly. Let's just say, for instance, you incorrectly input the date of birth, the year was wrong, and you notice that that needs to be corrected. You can also go ahead and click Edit here. And once you choose edit, you can go ahead and make any changes or corrections that need to be made in any of the fields that you input information for. So I'm just going to change the year to 79. and then click Save. And you see it saved the information and changed it to 1979. So then also you will notice that there are different fields here that has populated on this particular screen. You have your household members, income, assets, and unit rent. On the household members, this is where you will input all of the members of the household into the system. So you will see household members, and then you would choose new member button here. It's going to give you the new household member screen. This is where first it's going to ask you to input the head of house, the spouse or whomever you want to input first for this particular household. So I'm actually going to input the spouse name and then her social security number, her date of birth. And again, you will notice that there are 3 fields on this screen that has asterisks next to it that must be populated before you can move on to another screen. But again, DCA is requesting that you complete all the fields on this particular screen for each household member. And her relationship to the head of household, occupation, and her special population would be the same as the head of household, which would be family, and whether or not she was disabled. So here you will have 3 buttons. One is save, save and new, or save and close. So you will click save and new if you need to add additional household members. Save and close is basically stating that you're done with inputting household members and you're ready to move on to the next field, which would be income. So I'm actually going to input another household member. So I'm going to click Save and New. And what it's going to do is give me another blank screen to include another household member. This time I'm actually going to input an unborn child. And okay, so for unborn child, you'll notice there are still 3 asterisks here that you must complete for the unborn child. And basically, you do not have the birth date for the unborn child. So to be able to overwrite, not having to input the birth date, the first thing you would do would go into relationship, and then you would choose unborn child here. Once you choose unborn child, you see that now you no longer have to input the date of birth for the unborn child. And you actually can leave all the other fields blank also. And you would just click Save and New or Save and Close. If you're wanting to input another member, you will continue to click Save and Close, Save and New until you completed inputting all of the members of the household in the system. So I'm done actually inputting household members. So I'm going to actually select Save and Close. And you see here, it's going to list all of the household members that you input into the system. And it's going to give you the family size, the number of minors here. And then it's going to give you the information, the social security number, the birth date, the age, and their occupation for each member listed here. You will not get that information for the unborn child because you didn't have to input that information for the unborn child. So next you will go into actually income field. And this is where you will input the income for each member of the household that has income that needs to be reported into the system. So I will actually choose new income, and I'm going to get a screen to input my income for each household member that has income that needs to be reported. So if I hit the drop down box on the member, it's going to list each person that I added to the household member section here. So I'm going to choose Gerald and input his income information. And it's going to auto-populate the relationship to the head of household here. And it's basically just auto-populating that Gerald is the head of household. The source of income, there's a drop-down box you can choose from here. The annual income, there are two ways of inputting your annual income. You can either manually input it by just typing in income here, or you can have the system to auto-populate the income for you by clicking on calculate. Once you choose calculate, you will input the pay rate, the pay frequency, and the hours per year that the tenant actually works. And then once you input that three information, it's going to auto-populate the annual income for you, and you would just click apply. I'm actually just going to manually input the income. And then once you input the income, you're going to choose the verification source. And there's a drop-down box to choose the verification source. So I'm going to choose the earnings statement, check stubs. Then you will input the verification date of the source. So you're actually putting the date that you actually verified the source of income. And once that's completed, you're going to either choose Save and New or Save and Close. You're going to choose Save and New if you have other income that you need to list for the head of household for Gerald, or you're going to do Save and New if you want to input income for another member. So I'm going to do Save and New. And then I'm going to choose which member that I'm actually inputting additional income for. And that would be Miranda, and it auto-populate that she's the spouse. Her source of income, I'm going to choose. And then again, you can either manually input the annual income, or you can have the system populated for you by clicking on the calculate button. I'm going to manually input. And then it's going to ask you for the verification source for that income. And again, the date that you verified the source of income. And then again, I'm going to click Save and New if I have any additional income for Miranda to input, or Save and New if I want to input income for another member of the household. If I'm done with inputting income, I'm just going to choose Save and Close. And you see here, it's going to auto-populate information for each person that has income that I actually input into the system. Here you will get the annual income amount here, and it's going to give you the total annual household income here. And then the information for each member that I input income for here. So now I'm going to go into the asset field. And once I go into assets, it's basically the same thing. I would choose new assets, pretty much the same steps. And I will actually choose which member that I'm actually inputting assets for. I'm going to say Gerald. And the type of asset is going to be, um, I just say coin step collection. Here you see that there's asterisk here next to cash value. You have to input a cash value for any set assets that you're inputting into the system. And if there is any annual asset income, you will actually input that in that field. A verification source, you're going to choose the source, the verification source, and the date that you verified that source of income of asset. And again, I'm either going to choose Save and New if I'm going to input another asset for another member, or another asset for Gerald, or I'm going to choose Save and Close if there's no other assets I need to add to the system. But I'm doing Save and New, and I'm going to add an asset for Miranda. And I have to include a cash value for the asset. And if there's any annual asset income, I would include here the verification source and the date that I verified her source. And then again, I'm do Save and New or Save and Close if I'm done. I'm actually done with inputting any assets for any member of the household. So I'm going to choose Save and Close. And again, it's going to give me the annual income amount here and the total annual household income. And it's going to give me asset information for each person that I put asset information for. My final step would be here where it states unit rent. I will choose this field, and it's going to ask me to input the information regarding the rent for this particular unit. So it's going to ask me for a rent change date. Since this is an actual move-in, there's no rent change date that I need to input because the rent hasn't changed. It was an actual move-in. You would input rent change date for recertifications or gross rent changes or any time that the rent did change within that lease period. So the tenant paid rent, I'm going to input. If there are any mandatory charges, if any rental subsidy, um, I had actually input that the tenant wasn't receiving any subsidy. If there is utility allowance, you will put here, and then it will auto-populate the gross rent for you. And then once you're done with the rent section, you would just actually choose Save and Close. And once you choose Save and Close, it's actually going to take you back to the unit screen. And you see here that it's going to give you the um, information regarding that unit. The status is now occupied, it's not vacant. The head of household name, the last four social security numbers for the head of household, and the last certification date, which was the actual move-in that I just input. Again, if you look at just these the few columns here and you realize that there was an error listed. Say for instance, you spelled Gerald's name wrong. So what you can still go in and make changes or corrections here. You will actually click on the magnifying glass here, and you will actually go in and choose edit, and then you will click on Gerald's first name and then just change correct the name. If you see everything else is correct, then you would just actually do Save and Close again. And now you will see that the name was changed here. Another thing you can also do while you're on this screen is something that's called the income and rent test. And you can do this for any transactions that you input into the system, whether it's a move-in or recertification. You can do an income and rent test for the transaction that you input. So if I choose the unit here, an income and rent test, it's basically going to tell me the status of the income and the rent that I input into the system that particular for that particular tenant. So it's going to tell me the household information here for the household. And here it's going to tell me it's going to first give me the effective date of the income limit and a rent limit. Then it's going to give me the maximum amount of the income and rent limit for that particular effective date. And then once it does that, it's going to show the status whether or not the income is over limit or if it's over rent. If it does show over rent and over limit, the first thing you want to check is to make sure you input the correct rent and the correct income in the system for each of those members. And then the second thing you want to do is also to make sure that it's using the correct effective date for that particular transaction date. So for 2/5/2020, you want to make sure it's using the correct effective date of the income and rent limits for your particular transaction that you put into the system. So let's say, for instance, it's showing that your actual tenant that you input in the system is over the income limit. And you do realize that they are actually over the income limit and they are not actually eligible for the program and they need to be deleted. This transaction needs to be deleted from the system. You can actually delete a transaction before it's actually processed and sent to DCA. So what you would do is click on the unit here and then choose delete tenant cert. Once you choose delete tenant cert, when you get the screen, you'll either have a red X or a shaded gray X. If you have a red X, that basically means that that particular transaction has not been submitted or processed by DCA. If it's a gray X, that means that the transaction has already been submitted to DCA and has already been processed. So you are not able to delete that transaction. Since Gerald has not been submitted to DCA, you could just hit the red box, the red X here, and then it's asking you, are you sure you want to delete the selected item? And you will say, okay, and then it'll give you a message that it's going to delete. If you don't want it to delete, then you just do cancel and you will keep that particular transaction in the system. So that is actually how you will actually input your move-in transactions into the system and how you can delete any transactions that you input into the system in error. So those are the steps on how you will input your move-in transactions manually.